I'm Colleen Appel. I use she, her pronouns. I speak to you today as a facilitator for the Social Action Circle. My introduction rewrote itself when I learned about the vandalism that took place at the Acts of Praise Church, a Black church in North Springfield. I heard about it on the Tuesday evening news, and the thoughts that ambled through my brain were things like, oh, there's too much of that going on. What kind of hate makes people do that? That's horrific. I would never do anything like that. I hope somebody helps them out. And I went to bed, my usual response. I was startled awake with the realization that I must not wait around until somebody tells me what to do. I sent a card to Pastor Holland and enclosed a check. I acted quickly with a sense of purpose, mostly due to the fact that I've spent the last month in study and reflection. I was asked to deliver this particular message because I tried to advance the adoption of the eighth principle during my term as your president. At the time, I assumed that we as a congregation could check off some boxes on a list and proceed to a vote. But since then, I've learned that a greater commitment is required. Today, I will invite you again to commit to the work required to become anti-racist, someone who actively works to understand, explain, and solve racial inequity. Today's message is written by me, a privileged white person, as a communication to other white people in this space. If you are a BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color person, my message regards your lived experience. I'm not trying to speak over your voice, nor create a space that centers whiteness. The examples I give regarding the harm I've caused as a person of privilege might be triggering. Best practice would call us to offer an alternative BIPOC caucus, but this congregation is not able to offer it at this time, and that is unfortunate. As I thought about how to prepare for today, I knew enough to know that an individual commitment is required. I also knew that I needed to find a guide who would require a sustained effort from me. Before we can start working on dismantling white supremacy culture in our church, each of us has to be introspective and think about how we have individually contributed to it and benefited from it. But I'm not here today to hand out a list of must-dos. Instead, I will share with you what happened to me when I decided to get serious about working for racial justice. I found Layla Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy, Combat Racism, Change the World, and Become a Good Ancestor. It's a 28-day program with reflective journaling prompts for each day. Did I complete a chapter a day as suggested? Did I answer all the questions? No, I did not. The author said I had to make this work a priority, and my response was rebellion. I did not want to sign up for a lifetime commitment to anti-racist work. Surely, my slow and steady plod should be sufficient. That is, read a few more books by Black authors, watch a movie of importance, attend a UU offering on the topic. I did end up completing the course and have begun another 28-day study found in the White Allies Handbook. From the two books, I acquired a vocabulary that allowed me to process the harm that I have caused because of my white privilege. Having been raised in rural Northwest Iowa, where a sighting of a Black person was a rarity, I might be one of the whitest people you know. However, I thought I could at least identify as a non-racist because the teachings of my church were very progressive. Action is the key difference between being not racist and anti-racist. Non-racist might think good thoughts, but do little about it. I thought non-racism qualified me to be one of the good ones. Turns out it only qualifies me to be a white exceptionalist. White superiority is guaranteed to become an internal truth at a very early age when you're surrounded by whiteness. The particular experience in the poem I'm about to read screams white superiority and white savior. But until I wrote the poem just a couple of years ago, I viewed Friendly Town as a remarkable model of kindness. I also did not recognize the full degree of animosity the child experienced, nor the degree of superiority my family claimed until I wrote today's message. Background note. This poem resulted from an exercise that required me to use the words rain, gravel, ink, and carapace. The intersection of ice and gravel. The rain that channeled its way down the incline to my garage is frozen now and covered with a drift of snow. My car will break the ice underneath with a crunch and crackle. The sound can take me back to navigating Iowa roads on summer days. Tires rotating on gravel sounds much the same. Before that summer in the 60s, when we hosted him on our Iowa farm, the skinny Chicago kid had never traveled on gravel-covered back roads. The highways from Des Moines lulled him to sleep, but he startled awake when we turned onto the final road to home. "We're driving on ice," he exclaimed. The Friendly Town project brought him to Iowa to experience a culture of hard work, open spaces, expanded gardens, gentle cows, and friendly feasts. Let him milk a cow, weed a garden, climb the rock pile, and sleep in his own room. Have him live with a cheerful, robust farm family. Under a carapace of open-mindedness, these farm folks fought to claim the kids with ink-colored skins, and we didn't get the Black kid that summer. It was the next summer that the child of color was ours, but the storekeeper proclaimed this child was unwelcome in his town, and the swimmers at the pool hesitated to let him jump in. Friendly Town was not an exchange program. Cautious Iowa mothers would never send their children to the undisciplined streets of Chicago, and the mothers of our summer guests never were given the chance to invite us. This experience was just another way for white people to affirm themselves as good. It did not take into account what the children actually needed, but centered on white people's imaginings. White superiority is a deeply hidden, unconscious aspect of white supremacy that is hardly ever spoken about, but practiced in daily life without even thinking about it. Here's another example of a new understanding. I knew I had caused harm because what could have potentially grown to be a good friendship came to an end, but I didn't recognize what I had done. In fact, I justified my behavior as drawing boundaries for myself, and I tried to put it behind me. But the journal questions forced me to look at the incident again. What I had done is called tone policing. In effect, I asked her to change the delivery of her message because I didn't like the anger I was being asked to hear. Robin DiAngelo coined the term white fragility to describe my state of mind where even a minimum amount of racial stress becomes intolerable. I live in a white-centered world, holding white values and white norms over everything else. My study led me to think about ways to de-center whiteness. Scoop has encouraged me for some time now to join NAACP. So yesterday I met him at a meeting of the group and submitted my membership. They are very invested in getting out the vote, getting souls to the polls, and in quality education. This group has a number of fiery advocates for these two issues, and I'd like to follow their lead. In my introduction, I spoke of my realization that I do know how to address injustice without waiting for someone to tell me. I have also realized that I know what reparations might look like. I've been waiting for somebody, perhaps the Unitarian Universalist Association, to tell me what reparations I need to make. If it's money, how much should I give and where should I send it? However, my own plan has occurred to me, and I'll explain with a poem called Promises Broken after Walt Whitman. When I was called out on my farm girl white privilege, when the facts were laid before me of public subsidies, when I considered the billions in farm payments, how quickly I was offended as saying, not me. My Iowa farmhouse having been so poorly insulated, clothes left in the bathroom froze to the wall. But I turned to wondering how many farmers of color I knew. Iowa said to have so few they could be gathered in a bank basement. And I acknowledged knowing not a single one of them. There is no justification for my white ancestors being deemed worthy of a section of land and the bounty of public welfare. Newly freed slaves were promised 40 acres and a mule, the offer quickly withdrawn and land returned to slaveholders. How different would their lives be? How much richer would my life be had the promise been kept? My siblings and I have started the process of selling our Iowa farm to the three brothers who rent the farm now. Before he died, my father carefully vetted them as three young men who would carry on the tradition of family farming. But this book's author challenged me to take some very specific commitments. So I pledged to give some of the proceeds I received from the sale of the farm to address the racial disparities in farming. Only 1 4/10 of farmers identify as Black or mixed race, as compared to 14% 100 years ago. During this month of study, I worried that prioritizing racial justice would supersede my longtime commitments to healthy eating and sustainable living. I have decided it does not. I have decided instead that seeing things through a racial justice lens expands my other work and makes it even more purposeful. For instance, this week, our Speak Up asks us to address the high rate of maternal deaths in Missouri. Knowing that Black mothers are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth gives more urgency to the issue. Last year, even though I tried to understand the document, the characteristics of white supremacist culture, I could not have delivered this message. Last year, I could not dismantle what I could not see. I could not challenge what I did not understand. I believe it is the language I have acquired through my 28 days of study that has allowed me to begin to see and understand. You do not have to take the same path that I took. There are many guides for creating meaningful change. Please stay after church today, or join Seekers next week, or read the emails for resources and opportunities for study and reflection. After the service, I will offer you food. I attempt to eat more plants because of the immediate benefit to me. But if I consider that BIPOC people have less access to the resources that make this healthy plate practice possible, I start to think about plant-powered recipes that don't call for fancy ingredients and equipment, benefiting a greater number of people. Stop by the kitchen today to taste some of those results. I especially recommend the vegan Cheez-It crackers. I close with words from the back of the book, The Darkness Divine, by UU minister Kristen Harper, the book that arrived yesterday, too late to be read for today's message, but definitely one to be put on my to be read list. I insert the sentence here as a summary of my new understanding. Too often in US culture, and notably in faith communities, a culture of white supremacy is reinforced in damaging but unexamined ways that demean and dehumanize Black people, but are so commonplace they can easily escape notice. If there is any church in Springfield to take the lead on dismantling systemic racism, it ought to be First UU. Today, I advocate for individual study and reflection as necessary elements for growing a beloved community. Making conscious decisions toward anti-racism will contribute to building an equitable society for all. Let it be. Amen.